Welcome back, all my 40K fanatics out there. I'm DJ with Tim's Nation to bring you another episode of Table Talk. Last episode, we talked about watching my verbiage carefully, even though everyone in the comments section has no problem taking care of that part for me. Playing Warhammer 40K solo in your basement, and ways that you can practice 40K when you're not able to have a partner. Today, I kind of want to touch base with that a little bit more, go a little further with it, and actually show an example at one of my armies with deployment, what we're looking at, and more so with those firing lanes and everything else, with a little bit of deeper, closer look. And we're going to throw some cards in there too for tactical objectives and stuff like that and talk about that a little bit. So guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please do. Turn on the bell to get notified on all the content we bring here on the channel, including other versions of the same thing where we go over a lot of different tactics on the table, ways to help tune in your game a little more, maybe even, especially from somebody who, myself, my resume, I can sit here and list a bunch of different tournaments and finishes and stuff like that. But the most important value to any of the information I have to say, to put any value behind my word is, I have been in this situation for a long time. Being in restaurant industry means my hours are horrible. And that means that in order to learn this game and get better at this game, I had to come up with some different ways to be able to play or practice without having another person there, so that I could be able to compete at a high level at these tournaments. So today, we are actually going to go through the deployment process a little bit deeper with entire units. We are going to show that first turn a little bit further. Last video, I kind of said, here's areas where you could be versus these fire lanes and that. We're going to throw some cards down, and we're going to use my entire Xeris build for this demonstration. So I'm going to revamp the camera a little bit, and let's start deploying some units and talk about some certain things, and just talk about this in general of how and what I personally look at when I'm putting an army out on a table. All right, so here we go. So once again, we're going to do this from a Dawn of War perspective. Over time, we'll go over a couple different missions and some of the different deployments. But for this, we're going to do Dawn of War once again from a different angle. We're also going to deploy from over here. The reason why we're deploying from over here is twofold. One, I don't want to walk in front of the camera a bunch when I'm talking about certain things. And two, I still want to be able to show on an angle where from the opposing side where you're able to see things. Let me know in the comment section if you prefer this, or if you'd like to go to the opposite side of it and see where the units are deployed from another side. So we're going to start with this. Now, as I said, we're going to be running the Xeris build today. My Xeris build is 2 20-mans of Necron Warriors, 2 Ophidians, Hex Marks, Death Mark, or single Hex Mark, Death Marks, Scarabs, Reanimator, Xeris himself, a Catacomb Command Barge, 2 Technomancers with my Warriors, and 3 squads of Scorpeks with Scorpek Lords. So a lot of people are sour on the Scorpek Lords. I've liked them in this version. And a lot of the theory behind this list is, I want to use Xeris and his ability to give Armor of Contempt, the reduction of AP, to the Warriors, to be able to have something that can bog down and control the board. So, as we look at the map initially, the first thing we need to realize is how far we actually have to go out on this, which is basically 10 inches is where it comes into. So, I'm going to measure out for myself a 10-inch deployment zone so I can see. And a couple of things that I'm noting when I'm deploying these markers out here is, now, this is, again, the same Games Workshop terrain format, but I'll tell you this. If I was going to a GT, the GT pack would also have terrain measured out. So since I know that the terrain is going to be measured out, and I know the distances for all this stuff, when I look at this for a Dawn of War setup, which is one that I would actually practice significantly because it's one of my weaker deployments, I look at it and I see, where does some of this terrain fall? So some of the things I notice is that this piece of terrain right here is not fully in my deployment zone. I can use it to block on this opposite side, but as soon as I go into that, I'm not actually going to be getting out of my deployment zone from inside of it, and if I move into it, I'm going to be presenting myself as a target for my opponent. As we've said in the past, these pieces of terrain that are in the middle are ones that once you touch them, regardless of the windows or anything, you can be seen and see through. So these corner ones are not. So that's immediately a thing that I'm looking at this table and I'm thinking in my mind, how am I going to be able to put aggression onto objectives, and how do I want to set this for, how do I want to make this all start coming together? So the center objective, depending on the army you're playing against, can be your best friend or your worst enemy. With my list, I can do very well on the center objective. So we're going to try and play this practice game. We're going to try and play off that center objective. So the first thing in my mindset that I'm going to try and deploy is going to be my warriors. This is 2 reasons. Number 1, it doesn't necessarily matter in a lot of ways what my opponent's doing, because I want my warriors to progress to the middle. So no matter what my opponent deploys, the warriors are going to still continue to do what they're doing. So let's go ahead and get these guys deployed. Okay, so now we're deployed with the Necron warriors. I also put the Canoptic Reanimator out here for a couple of reasons. 1, this is assumed to be a 5-inch tall obscuring piece of terrain. So as long as I am not behind or not on the base or is somewhere in the middle, the Reanimator is well protected and is able to give his buff to my warriors nearby. Now, a very critical point to the deployment of these warriors and where they're set up and how I'm doing this is 2 things. 1, the Technomancer placement. 2, warrior placement. Obviously, the warriors are going to be able to be seen. Right now, with me having warriors in the building, in the rune, that is completely able to be seen through, there's warriors that can be shot from my Gauss Reaper squad, as well as the Flayer squad. That's okay, for a couple of reasons. 1, the biggest reason, reanimation. When my opponent shoots and does damage, if my opponent goes first and does light early damage to me to try to remove some warriors, it's going to be more effective for me. Now I'm going to be able to take warriors that are in cover and in the back and move them closer forward to the front. Now, the key with the reanimation is the models must be placed in coherency with the unit as it happens. So the first models that I reanimate, let's assume my opponent goes first, hits, kills a couple of guys. You know, we do have a 5-up, feel no pain. We do have, I'm going to move this little Technomancer out of my way up there. We do have a 5-up, feel no pain. We do have some cover buffs, and it's early game. So let's just assume we get a couple of guys up over here. Now we still have a few dead as well. These guys are all placed in coherency, 2 inches with that unit. But this is done off of the stratagem. So we spent our 1 command point that we gained and brought a couple warriors back. Potentially brought the whole squad back. But for argument's sake, we're leaving this. Now, when we go into our turn and activate our reanimation, and these guys come back, these models are already on the table. We can now put them 2 inches further. Right now, at this point, I need a 4-inch move to be within range of touching that center objective. This can be critical and can also make a savvy opponent who's used to Necrons may not shoot at that unit, which means that you're just giving your opponent's going to end up forfeiting their benefits from going first because they don't want you to creep across the table and grab the center objective from them. So this is both a plus and minus for you in the sense of if your opponent does hit you, yes, you may have some models that go to the grave, but we are Necrons. We can reanimate. And with that, we can just start creeping across the table. Same is true for the Green Necron Warrior Squad. They're able to get cover. They have the feel no pain. All of the same things there. Now, I did talk about the Technomancers and talked about their placement. Precision weapons require having line of sight to the character in order to hit them. So make sure, as we start expanding across the field, we want our Technomancers to stay out of line of sight. So the Technomancer needs to stay off of these pieces of terrain and behind it so it's obscured It cannot be seen as the units push forward. Because of the size of the squad, it should be very easy to keep that Technomancer back behind walls until it becomes irrelevant, maybe in combat or something like that, where you're able to then take in combat and move to one of the outside places. We'll come back at that in a minute. Now, the only other thing that goes into this combination is going to be Mr. Xeris. Xeris's role is going to be with the Necron Warriors, so he's going to want to be in this area. And the only thing I might shift up as I look for it now is I'll probably take a couple of these warriors here, move them a little out of the way, and move Mr. Techno as well. And just so Xeris can be in an excellent position to start moving upfield. He has Lone Operative, and the buff he gives is super, super strong to be able to give the additional AP, as well as reducing AP. So we want him to stay with the Warriors for the duration of the game. He's also very tough to take down. So if he can push on to center objective, he could also be a very, very healthy unit to help hold center. Not to mention, because of this Dawn of War style deployment, the distance between our home objective and the center field objective is relatively close. So Xeris can play a nice happy medium where he's able to go either direction later in the game for whatever our needs may be. Now, we have a couple more things that we need to do. We have a lot more we need to deploy, not just a couple more things. So the next things but right now we have currently deployed 4 units. And of those 4 units, our opponent now must deploy 4 in respect, maybe even 5, depending on who is attacker and defender. But whatever our opponent deployed, that's not going to change that. So let's continue to burn some deployments. We're going to deploy our Ophidian destroyers. Now, here's the thing with Ophidians. If you go first, then they're stuck on the table for a turn. But if you go second, then at the end of your opponent's movement phase, you're able to pick these guys up and bring them back down on the field. That's going to be the critical point of what Ophidians can do, especially with secondary objectives and tactical cards. Now, we'll talk about stacked secondaries later on, where you pick your secondaries before the game and leaving that. We'll talk about those in another video. For this, in all intents and purposes, we're going to shuffle up and draw cards for this build. So now with the Ophidian destroyers, what I want to do is I want to look at the table and see where can my opponent draw a lane to try and snipe these guys early and find a spot to put them that they can't be seen. Now, because the buildings on the bottom floor are completely blocked, we're going to put these Ophidians right back here. Now, some may say, well, why not just put them in the building to guarantee that safety? Because that's where I want my Scorpeks to go. The Scorpeks will not be leaving the table. Now, we can put these guys all the way up here. And from what I see, and I know it might be kind of difficult from that angle, so let's use a tape measure to draw it. So from right here where that base goes, my opponent has to go all the way over here to be able to draw a line of sight. That means that they have to have a model right, and we'll use a Doomstalker for it, right over here. That's at halfway to even pause. Actually, now that I look at this even, they need to even go further. That's how far that does need to go, all the way to halfway to be able to shoot. And that's simply 1 unit. Nice thing with Ophidians are, unless you kill the squad, 1 is fine. Reanimations, they come back. They're fine. So that's that position I'm safe and I'm fine with. If my opponent wants to dedicate so far and so deep to be able to shoot at them on turn 1, they're really going to be sacrificing a lot. Yes, there is an objective marker right there that they could go to and walk over and walk around to, but they're still pulling all the way across their table edge, which now a quick little scoot, and I'm going the other way. And at the same time, too, as I said in the previous video, this is our deadly firing lane for both myself and my opponent. This is where the biggest and baddest weapons are going to want to rain. There's also a decent firing lane this way, too. Now, which comes right down here. Now, other than that, a shooting unit on the outside like that, while next turn could move into a position and have a better firing arc down this way, that really does limit them and limits their visibility and limits their usability during the game. All to go after Ophidians. And at the same time, will they even be able to pick up the entire squad of Ophidians? So I'm not too worried about that. I'm not too worried. If my opponent really wants to push in and dedicate there, that's fine. I'll give them the objective on that outside, and we'll leave it alone. Over here, we're going to mirror that and do the exact same thing once again, and place these guys over here. Now, over here, there's not as good of a firing lane, so I actually have space to be able to put these guys back here, like so, and now there is really, my opponent can't even drive over this way. So the only place in this deployment that my opponent does have the ability to drive and take on Ophidians would be on my right or their left to be able to sweep in here and try and do some damage to the Ophidians in the early goings of the game. I'm not too concerned about that. If they really want to hit the Ophidians that bad, that's fine. Not to mention, again, how much damage are they really going to put through to them? They're going to be in cover. And if you kill one, you kill two, you haven't done anything. As long as one is alive, we can start reanimating, we can still leave the table, and we can still do a lot of work. Yes, the unit could theoretically get battle shocked, but this is the safest spot that I can see for them to start out the game. And again, it really forces our opponent to have to dedicate into that to shoot that ways. Now, and again, what gun is it that's going to be going over there? If you really, really feel like there is a weapon that could do that, the nice thing is with Ophidians, they have the ability to deep strike. So we could put them into reserve and deep strike them. And here is why we do this. Because now at that point, like we just said, there is a chance that someone could kill the Ophidian. So if I go into a heavy, heavy gunline matchup, maybe a Votan, a Tau, or something like that, I might consider picking the Ophidians up and just putting them in deep strike. Most matchups, I'm not going to really worry about that too much. And we're just going to let the Ophidians hang out there because chances are we're picking them up and that's where they're going. I'm going to leave this Doomstalker over here because we might use him for a couple more examples later on because it's a very tall unit. So we got our warriors down. We got our Ophidians down that it really didn't matter what our opponent does at this point. Now it comes down to our Scorpeks for this unit, for this army, and what am I thinking and what am I going to do with the Scorpeks? So let me get them deployed. We'll come back after that. All right, so we got the Scorpeks deployed and the Catacomb Command Barge. Now, what this does is also kind of opens up a concept in here. As we just stated, we talked about the fact that there could be a possible angle that the Ophidians on the right could get hit, my right side. So after looking at the full deployment, and since we're messing with this a bit, now I'm able to see, I could put the Ophidians completely untouchable and take them from here and put them over here. Now we're looking again at these firing lanes. Okay, so there is a firing lane here-ish. Right here, our opponent would have to be directly on that objective marker to start drawing firing lanes down this way. And if they do, if they move through the building, come up this way, because then we're talking infantry. Infantry is coming up here on the objective to take this objective, which for us, just coming out of our deployment zone to get to center field, that's 12 inches. We're 12 inches from center. So what units are going to move 12 inches to tag that objective and be able to put enough firepower down to pick stuff up like this? There's one that comes to mind, and that is Tau crisis suits. So there could be a possibility. So going into a Tau matchup, we might change up the way we do some of this stuff because now those crisis suits are there, but a lot of others are not really going to be able to. So they're going to, most likely, they're going to have firing lanes that they're going to take here. They're going to look for the firing lane X pattern over here. We're going to watch and make sure that we don't deploy too far to be able to take that area. We have Scorpeks located here, here, and here that are able to, because they're infantry, pass through walls, move forward, and do all sorts of Scorpek stuff and be threatening to all three objectives. This squad able to sweep over to middle, this one able to go this way, and this one able to fight over on that objective. Now, my right flank is pretty weak. My left flank, a little bit more happier, especially because of the fact that with the way the warriors are positioned, we can easily spread over there to that left side. And I like that. I like that for what I'm trying to do because I don't have as much long-range fire. So I'm not trying to support these firing lanes. I don't want to put stuff in there to give my opponent free shots. And I want to be able to progress across the field towards these objectives on my terms. So the only thing that we have to worry about is a unit that is able to go from their opponent's deployment zone to this objective and destroy everything over here. In that type of matchup, like we said, in like a Tau matchup or something like that, this is probably a scenario where what I would do is I would take the squad of Ophidians that I have back here and I'd put them in deep strike so that my Scorpeks could then hide behind the wall over here. So everything, for the most part, is hidden. For my opponent to be able to get over there, I can easily keep stuff hidden back where they're not able to draw a line over here and just be safe for that first turn. This way, I'm in a position where if I go second, cool, I can pick guys up, move stuff around, and not lose too much of my force. But if I go first, I am able to expand to these other areas. Now, it's always in best practice to assume worst case scenario. I'm deploying to go second, so we're going to play as if we go first. Yes, the Scorpeks, this squad of Scorpeks is deployed a little more aggressive, but here's one thing that's kind of cool too. If the opponent decides to try to get crafty with it, now crisis suits can fire and fade, so they can hit here, shoot, and then jump behind a wall and get out of the way. So that is a risk. So that's where I said that if in the Tau matchup, this I would reconsider. But that's one army. We're not worried about that with one army. We're worried about our general overall plan. Then we'll talk about some specifics later on. So we're going to assume that we end up going first, which, to be honest, is the worst case scenario for this build. And we're playing into Space Marines. So Space Marines have some decent firepower. They are able to hit early. As we see with Lane's build, he's able to jump around the field, but he's not able to do that on turn one. Much like us, he's got to wait for a movement phase to be able to, spend, or an end of opponent's turn to spend command points to pick guys up. So if we go first, we're not in too much of a worry of him hitting us. Now he's going to hit us during his turn. So how do we embrace for that? How do we embrace for the Marines picking up and hitting us later on? What are we looking at? What are we doing? All right, so let's start with that. We're going to draw two cards. We have Attempting Target and Deploy Teleport Homers. So Deploy Teleport Homers is going to require us to, and we also have a command point. So Deploy Teleport Homers is going to require us to get on the center objective or get to our opponent's deployment zone to score points on that one. Tempting Target, our opponent's going to pick one of the objective markers, and that's going to be the one that we need to hold. So in this scenario, probably the most difficult objective marker right now for us to snag would actually be the center objective marker, being the fact that currently at this point, one model needs to move 8 inches. So with a 5-inch move, we need a 3-inch advance. Luckily for us, we do have a command point that can allow us to do it. So in this scenario, let's assume that our opponent does make the center objective marker the tempting target, because that is probably the worst case scenario. Anything else in this, we could theoretically sacrifice a squad of Scorpeks in a safe way. This objective over here, there's some terrain that we could use to just barely tag and stay inside the rune. If we get hit, we can pull the Scorpek on the objective marker, fall back. We scored our points. At the same time, that center objective marker is the one that would allow us to score something off the Deploy Teleport Homers. So, yes, there could be something to say of taking a side objective marker from an opponent that would want us to do that so that they could try to not let us double up on here. However, we only have one way of getting that center objective marker, and that's with the warriors. So our opponent selected the center objective marker. Now our Scorpek, even with their move, are not going to make it over there. The Scorpek that are in this side are about 12, maybe 11 inches away. Xeris, on his best day, he would move up to here, and he, as well, is about 10 inches away. So he's also needing a 3 advance to get onto that objective. So our best bet is still going to be the warriors. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend our command point. This way, we can not only count our weapons as assault, but we are also going to be able to re-roll the advanced dice. Then we roll our dice, and perfectly and beautifully, I roll a 5 right off the rip. So that's going to mean we are now able to move that 10 inches. Chugga chugga woo woo. Here we go. Boom. Our warriors are now able to get up on that point, depending on whichever one we want. Because we spent the strat and they have assault weapons now, they are still eligible to shoot. Therefore, we are able to score both deploy teleport homers and a tempting target by taking the center objective. Simple. So now with that being said, what does that now mean for the rest of our army? And that's where we need to think. Okay, so do we need to hold these for primaries? Some of the missions, we only need a second objective marker for primaries. We don't need multiple ones. So depending on how our opponent deploys, especially in Dawn of War setups such as this, if our opponent goes heavy over here to draw a firing lane to be able to put that heat on that center objective when we moved up onto it, we're going to want to not give them a whole bunch in that firing arc. So a couple good options. Here is what a 7-inch move looks like for the Scorpeks. So this one guy that's in the wall, moves 7 inches up from here, goes right here. Well, look at that. He's about 1 inch away. We'll advance with him. Oh, we got another 5. Okay, so let's move him just slightly back here behind the wall so he can't be seen. And then all of his buddies, who also got that nice, good move, are also going to move behind this wall and hang out over here. So now we have Scorpeks in position, able to pounce next turn and attack where need be. We have a second squad of Scorpeks that can do the same exact thing, or they can move over into this spot, or this squad can stay back into this. We'll just switch these two up for that reason. This one can now go over into here, hiding in the ruins still, using the fact that they can't be seen on first floor. But now, instead of being in my deployment zone, they are now slightly out and able to strike, and the 7 inches puts them just past halfway. At the same time, the 9, we're going to use some sticks for this one. We want to make sure that we're not giving an opening for our opponent to deep strike or drop something into the backfield. So we'll look right here. We got plenty of room. We're doing pretty good here. We'll move him back just a little bit. And we've zoned that out pretty much. The pocket that's here is very small. Unless you're putting a single model back there, we're good. Okay, cool. So we still have our backfield coverage. Same deal over here. We're in a good position. We can just restructure our Scorpek a bit, just so that I'm once again able to make that good threat on the middle and then keep them towards the back. So once again, we have a nice 9-inch gap over here. So there's not really a good place for them to drop in. Again, one single character model, maybe at most, smaller base. The warriors are going to continue to move up. This entire squad will move and maybe fan out just a little bit, just to give us some more coverage. And we will use the big brick of warriors to make sure that we once again are covering our backfield. Now, granted, our opponent can shoot at us and hit us and remove models, but that's after the deep strike, That's after the pickup and drop in of guys or whatever may occur. So we're okay with that. Technomancer moves up as well. He might hang out back here behind the wall a little bit, and we'll string a couple guys back here so that we're able to keep that protection. Now, we are obviously not going to be getting as much of a cover buff from them, but that's okay. Xeris is going to take advantage of the lone operative factor. He's not going to move super, super far, but he wants to definitely still be in a good position. And then the other squad of warriors, they're going to advance as well. They only got a 3. And honestly, they're going to be the ones that would be moving for 4 Xeris, but they're just going to fan out to try to protect that ability of Xeris. Now, what I'm noticing as soon as I do this, and this is what makes practice so nice, is I don't necessarily need to push Xeris like that. So now I'm reconsidering, and he's going to hang out back here. He's going to stay back behind the wall where he can't be seen, and let him wait his turn. Move these guys up. Get the techno, that first techno I was talking about. He's going to come over here, so he's still within range of these guys. We'll move a couple warriors over here to make a little bit of a better position, so he's in coherency. And then we got our warriors up. Oop. 2 guys hung out and back. The reanimator will then start to move forward as well to be able to just be in that constant position, because that 12-inch bubble is taking him all the way to center field from there. And then we have the Catacomb Command Barge popping the Resurrection Orb on the warriors to keep that presence going. And he'll probably just move. He wants to keep within range of both squads. One guy's over here, 6 inches. So we'll put him right over here to be ready to also use his fly ability, jump over, go around, pick and choose what he's doing. These Ophidians will stay on this objective for the time being. These Ophidians will wait here. And that's it. That's turn 1. Right there is entirely turn 1. And now the rest of the game can play from this point. Our opponent's able to shoot, hit the warriors. If we see them, if our opponent gets aggressive and puts some combat units, some crusaders and stuff like that, and puts them in the center and tries to, and we're about to face and hit a charge, then if he shoots, instead we reanimate to the back. If our opponent shoots at us but doesn't make a play at the center, we can reanimate forward. Even if our opponent is trying to make a play at center with a combat-worthy unit, we may try to reanimate in there to just bog down with absolute bodies. It just matters on that matchup. But now, moving forward with the rest of the game, even if we lose this squad of warriors on that first turn, we have another squad of warriors backed up with Xeris, and everything can start to push. Xeris can push, all that can push. The reanimator's in a position to go completely to the left flank and start supporting the Scorpeks on this side. Both squads of Ophidians come off the table and are able to land wherever we need going into the next turn. And for just conversational pieces, we'll draw, and we draw Assassinate and Area Denial. So Area Denial, we're going to try and take the center, which we've already started a game plan there. Awesome. Assassinate, Assassinate's Assassinate. It's going to happen. Either it's going to happen or it's not. The character's there or it's not. For this list and for this build, I'm not too worried about that right now. I would not spend a command point to pitch this one. Instead, I would use this as an opportunity to pitch this for a command point to put ourselves in the more positive buff. We just spent a command point to advance to be able to do a secondary, so I want to be able to have that command point to still reanimate later into the game, especially because our reanimation strat is so strong in encompassing with the reanimator. Now, with the Ophidians, they were pulled off the table, and like I said, Assassinate and the, what was the other one called? Excuse me. Area Denial are not ones that the Ophidians are necessarily useful for. So then what do? Well, we just put the Ophidians back down somewhere where they can't get shot. Pick them up again next turn. Use them in the next phase. There might be some opportunities to be aggressive, but since we don't have an opponent right now, all we're worried about is making sure that we can score these every single turn. We can't score Assassinate, so we can pitch it for a command point, and then we can try and score Area Denial by getting and clearing out the center. We have units in position to do so with the Scorpeks here, the massive amount of warriors that we can try and bog down the center objective with. We can move Xeris up to be able to do some more aggressive plays, and if we wanted to, we could land the Ophidians and try and make 9-inch charges off them. So that's our turn 1 going into our turn 2. Couple things that I mentioned in there too, with the deployment as well. What about Tyranids? What about Tau? What about Orcs? What about these units that are going to get up in your face quickly? So with this build, in my mind, the warriors end up becoming my shield for a lot of things, a lot of zone outs. So Tyranids are able to bring units right up into your face super early, I have no problem putting the warriors and making them very wide so that my opponent does hit them, and then we can break off. So here's a little nifty combat trick. We'll move these warriors out of the way, and we'll discuss that with it. So our opponent hits us and charges in. And for this demonstration, we'll bring some gray knights over to the table because I have them out here. So we get charged. And we're going to get charged by these gray knights. They're going to hit us right from the front, and they're going to hit us right here. Okay? So we're not going to win this battle in combat. We'll assume it's a bigger squad, but we're not going to win this battle in combat at all. And they're hitting us, and they're hitting us hard. All right, we lost 7 guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to take, excuse me, we're going to take this dude right here. We're going to take this dude right here. And then we're going to pull these 4. And we're going to pull these 2. And we're going to pull 1 more. Now, what happens is our opponent, if they wish to consolidate, can do one of 2 things. Consolidate so that they are within range of an objective marker, or, pile in, or pile in to be in base contact with so that they land to the closest enemy unit. So our opponent chooses to do so. Now it's our turn. So we get to consolidate. We choose to not. We get to pile in. We will also choose not. So right now in combat, we have 2 Necron warriors. Guess what? They're not good in combat. So they fail. Now we go to the end step, morale step, and check coherency. Well, this squad is currently not in coherency. So, therefore, we have to remove models until we are in coherency. We remove this one, which was an engagement, and we remove this other one, that's engagement. Now what? Well, now we are not within engagement range of any unit. This means that into our turn, we are freely able to shoot at this unit. This unit is able to move, shoot, and do everything we would want it to because it is not in engagement range. And with Necron warriors and the ability to reanimate, like right now, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have 9 dead. So, reanimation from the regular reanimation, we're within range of an objective. So D3 plus 3, so we got 4 back. All right, so there's 4. Blip, blip, blip. Still got 5 missing. All right, we got our D3 that we get as a bonus. We got 3, so we get 2. That means we get 2 more. Boop, boop. Oh, we got 3 guys left dead. That's pretty decent. Oh, not to mention, when we go into our opponent's command phase, the reanimator will let us do D3 more. We got 3. We're back at full squad. So there's a lot of little tricks that you can play off that, especially with this center field push, to make sure that we're in a position constantly pushing forward into those things. And that's what I would consider with Tyranids. Except the only difference is, instead of having this squad in the building, I'd probably put this squad out here, more into the lane, going after that objective marker. And in general, that may be something I consider as well. Like looking at this, I might consider just in general, that squad being over here, with the Scorpeks being back here to protect center. That might be a more advantageous position on Dawn of War, so that I'm able to push into 2 objectives or bring the warrior squad over here. Gives me a couple more options. But using the warriors to hold out those units. So that those units have to just crash into warriors. They want to try and come around the outside and go at Scorpeks. You know what? Honestly, I'll fight some nids with Scorpeks, especially that Scorpek Lord. He can hurt. He can really, really hurt. Now, Tau, much like Eldar, have a very, very irritating ability in their fire and fade mechanic. And while I play Grey Knights that can do something similar, their fire and fade mechanic is much more annoying because usually it's on units that have stronger guns than what we're talking about. So how do we get around the one thing, which was the warrior crisis suit squad hitting here and fire and fading away? Or what about a crisis suit going here and then, again, fire and fade away? Fire and fade, for those who don't know, is a mechanic that basically, it's an old school term that refers to whenever a unit is able to shoot and then execute any type of move, any type of movement, whether it's a 6-inch move, 7-inch move, a full move, whatever it may be. So we often use the term fire and fade. That comes into, now that's some little bit of problems here, especially because of the fact that much of those tile crisis suit units do have the firepower to potentially pick up a Necron warrior squad. So how would we get around that? How would, going into this, if playing against Tau, what would we do? What would we change and what would we make different? Well, we want to put our opponent in a position where if they fire and fade and fall back and go into that area and go into that realm, they're going to be at a risk of getting hit as well, and bait them to make the change. So this is a spot where we can get shot at. This is a spot we can get shot at. And this is definitely a spot we can get shot at from a unit that is then able to fall back. The Scorpeks over here actually do a pretty decent job of protecting into that area, being the fact that they are able to move 7 inches directly through the wall from our deployment zone, puts them pretty close to that objective marker and gives them the ability to present a decent charge that is threatening enough, especially because of the angle that our opponent would have to draw to be able to get shots down this lane. So I'm not too worried about there. So once again, the soft Scorpek unit over there, I'm okay with that. Center. Our opponent's able to be way, way back here and shoot and present firing threats and then fall back way out of range. So that's a risk. Over here is probably the scariest spot, because over here, if they're able to get into this spot, they can then jump away completely, and they don't necessarily need to dedicate as far over here as they do over here. Now, they still have to dedicate far into over there, which means that our Scorpeks, once again, from over here, being able to move 7 inches and go on to nearly onto that objective, still present a risky threat to charge for how far they can get in. So the Scorpeks on the corners will still help in those crisis suit matchups. We just don't want to get to a point where we're playing an attrition battle, where our warriors get hit, we lose the warriors, and then we move forward. And then the crisis suits hit again, potentially move something else, and then we can hit them and start to hurt them. So we don't want to be in that position. We don't want to run that risk. So now, what are some options that we have? Well, the first option that we have is the Scorpeks. The Scorpeks can be put out onto a front, I'm sorry, not Scorpeks, the Ophidians. The Ophidians can be put onto a front line where they have an even faster move. So we can put the Ophidians out here. What this means for our opponent is that they have the option to be able to hit the Ophidians if they choose to not hit the Ophidians and they go after warriors or something else. The Ophidian speed allows them to be able to move 10 inches right to center and charge. Same deal over here. So now instead we can take these warriors. I'm sorry, I'm just going to scoot you guys all back here real fast. And we can take the Ophidian destroyers and put them over here as well. And now if our opponent does want to answer to, well, okay, pause. We can put the Ophidian destroyers behind the wall over here. Let's not get too hasty. And we can also take the Necron warriors and hide them behind a wall. Now, this list does not have a veil in it. And I know some people might be asking, like, well, can't you just veil the warriors? No, there is no veil in this list. Now, these warriors can instead hang out back here, out of line of sight, out of fire, and not really have to worry about it for the first turn, while the other squad of warriors can be back over here, ready to move forward early on in the game. And the reanimator also hiding. And we use the Ophidians right here to now provide us a central threat with their 10-inch move, being able to get to right about there. They present a threat. We're going to assume a 6-inch charge right to the end of that. So if our opponent attempts to move here to shoot at something and then fades back away, yeah, we're not really in that great of a room to get that charge on them. But now we have a unit that can hit that center objective, hold the center objective, do what Ophidians do in holding that, and cost our opponent the fact that now they have to go after this thing. Also, on top of the fire and fade, if they want to get into a position anywhere over here, they need to shoot at something to fall back. So if there is no target for them to shoot at to fall back, they're going to be less compelled to move up in there and throw their things out to the wind. In this matchup versus Tau, the center objective may not exactly be what we're going after. We may, for all intents and purposes, try and hit that objective as hard as we can and leave everything else on the field. Because if we can slowly close in and give the Tau nowhere to go, then we can charge and hit them and hold them in place. Now, the Tau do have ability to fall back and shoot if they purchase it. If they do, that means those suits are going to be significantly weaker than some of the other ones, at least defensively. So that's basically where that comes in. Tau is its own other monster in a lot of matchups, and a lot of armies need to address certain shooting armies like that by themselves. Tyranids, we can use the warriors as a wall all day in this build. With Tau, probably need to use the Ophidians to be a little scarier, to be able to charge and potentially shut units shooting off. Now, the Tau crisis suits are vehicles, which means that they can still shoot out of combat. But getting a negative on those guys, a negative to hit, could be very, very nice and very efficient in just how many guns they put down. So that's probably I'd play into that. Haven't had as much experience Tau, so probably would need to run this into Tau a little bit. But being able to put the Scorpeks and put the Ophidians in a position to threaten this objective, potentially threaten this objective, because again, if the Tau player moves up onto this objective, they're in range for us to be charged. So we can just not be seen until they touch that objective and then hit them and then they remove us. And if we can start trading that way, a 100-point squad of Scorpeks versus crisis suits, that's going to start to do well. And on top of it, they're going to want to observe. So even if stealth suits are moving into these positions to hit us, if we can hit and remove those, they're going to start losing a lot of abilities to get bonuses to hit and severely get weaker in their shooting phase. So units like the Ophidians could potentially provide a lot of boosts in those scenarios. Now, a keen eye might note that there was a couple of units that I didn't really talk about too much in this. There's a specific reason why, and those are the Death Marks, the Hex Mark, as well as the Canoptic Scarabs. The Scarabs have a very simple role. They're super cheap and able to just kind of fiddle on from a corner and help for engage on all fronts or behind enemy lines. So their role is set to a secondary when it's drawn, hopefully in turns 2 or 3. The Death Marks are kind of in a similar position as well. While they are snipers and while they could get some precision hits and maybe help in the Tau matchup to be able to take out a Cold Star Commander, highly unlikely, or hit another character in a unit, the likelihood is still very low in those scenarios. However, what they do well at is being able to deep strike. They're another unit that can deep strike into a position and help score secondaries. So the Scarabs and the Death Marks both fulfill a similar role. Why Scarabs over Locusts, the 30-point Locust Destroyer unit? More wounds, ability to explode and do mortals, which I really like to be able to have that utility in the list. The last one, which is one that actually does matter, and does matter actually into the Tau matchup, very much so, is the Hexmark Destroyer. The Hexmark Destroyer, because of his ability and what he can do, he is a wild card. So with the strategy that I implement on the battlefield, I don't like to keep the Hexmark in mind because of how much of a wild card he is. His play, his drop, his deep strike, his deployment, and his abilities are going to be weighted entirely on what my opponent does and how I can react with him. He is a reactive unit by all standards, and I don't base my strategy on how I will play and win the game over his. He is very threatening, and he could be a great utility going into that Tau matchup to be able to just randomly start shooting at crisis suits. Not the greatest amount of damage. It would take quite a bit for him to take out some of that stuff. Might be a little more use in Tyranids, just not as much shooting, per se. But all in all, his utility is really banked on how my opponent plays and what they do. In other scenarios where the hex mark is not as useful or powerful, he's tiny. He can go in a corner behind enemy lines, engage on all front, deploy teleport homer, deploy scramblers, all those different secondaries that they can score. So a lot of those units are wild card, are pocket aces to be able to just, you look at them, they look nice, and in the right situation with the right flop, you can score points with them and score big because they just exist in the list. But as far as the overall scheme of the army and the build and the play, they're extras. They're extra pieces for the general hold. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I sure actually learned a lot from doing this. Like I feel like I'm gained a lot in one of the deployments that is one of my weaker deployments, Dawn of War, and seeing what I could do, and also put kind of that thought in my mind of like, what do with Tyranids, with Tau? How do we play? Where do we move? And seeing some of that and getting a stronger feel that I feel like just by making this video, I can play this army stronger and in a general all-around setting. This army is one that I feel like has a lot of tools to play on secondaries and is one of the Necron builds that I'm considering to maybe take to a tournament. I really want to try Destroyer Cult out some more because I was very surprised by them, and I think we're going to see them again on the channel here very soon. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making this video. I really enjoyed this, and I finally got all the models put away. Whoo-wee. That's one of the things. Got to clean it up at some point, especially with little kids running around. I don't want one of the kids to go, ooh, look, cool skeleton, crunch. Because as much as these guys like to die and stand back up, one of their true weaknesses is a 1-year-old's hand going squish. They don't reanimate from that. All right, guys. Well, hopefully you enjoyed the video. I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching.